What is up? Hopefully you guys are having a wonderful day. Back here with some Resident Evil 4 gameplay, doing a little fishing here. And I released a poll a day ago up on a channel, and I was asking a question in terms of Resident Evil Requiem, and the question was, how many of the main OG characters would you like to see in the game? And I consider the main OG characters of Chris, Jill, Claire, Leon, and Ada. I think most people would agree that those are the five biggest, with the exception of Wesker, but they are the five biggest, most major characters in Resident Evil. And I know we have newer characters coming in after fact, but those are the original OG main five Resident Evil characters. So, those five. Among those five, how many would you like to see in Resident Evil Requiem? And to not my surprise, the vast majority voted they want to see them all. They want to see every one of them. They want to get as many as they possibly can. And I get it. I feel it. I understand you. But I want to ask you a question for those who wanted that. Is that really what you want? Because there's an old adage and it goes like this. Be careful what you wish for, because it might come true. And unfortunately, it might come true in the worst of ways. Because here's the thing, alright? Ever since this game has been revealed, we've obviously been doing a lot of deep dive, thinking of what they're going to do, what they were thinking, how are they going to do everything justice. But one of the big vibes of Resident Requiem is that it's supposed to be a big milestone turning point for the franchise. And it's supposed to be a big closure of the events that started this whole franchise, as well as a big new beginning. So it gives the impression that this is going to kind of be like a passing of the torch, a passing of the guard, where it's going to seemingly conclude a lot of the OG storylines and possible characters. So it makes sense that you would probably have some OG characters from the whole Raccoon City incident in this game. But here's the problem, alright? Let's just say that you have all those characters in there. You have Chris, Jill, Leon, Claire, and Ada on top of Grace. If you can't see the whole problem with that, then here, I'll help you out. Now, I've heard some people say that, hey, it'd be cool if it'd be like, a lot like a Avengers Endgame moment where they all team up, and that's all good and sounds cool on paper, but the problem is, it just sounds good on paper. It would be an absolute disaster to do something like that. And honestly, the more I think about it, the less OG characters they have, the better. Because let me explain. Why am I so against having that many of them? Well, the biggest reason of all is simple. It's Capcom. Capcom, and I don't want to give the notion that I don't like Capcom. I do. Their strength is their addictive gameplay cycle in the Resident Evil franchise. That's their bread and butter. It's the thing they execute to perfection. They do it really well. It's why we keep constantly coming back for more and playing these games. But what they're not great at, what they are hit and miss at, is their writing. They're not the greatest writers. So you want me to believe that they're going to have all these OG characters in here, and that they're going to respect them enough to conclude their stories on top of doing a brand new character in their story, on top of doing the rest of the game and it being satisfying for everybody? Yeah. Even if Capcom was great at writing, I still think that's a tall, damn near impossible order to ask. Because, as I said before, this is a survival horror game, and survival horror games are not typically long. And you're asking a lot to have all these major OG characters having all of their plot points and stories resolved, because if this is supposed to be a conclusion to their stories, you have to resolve everything, or it's just not going to be satisfying and good, and we're going to nitpick everything to death. And that's my problem here, is that there's too many things. It's trying to tackle too many things at once if that's what's really going to happen. I don't personally think it will, but I could be wrong. And who knows, maybe that's the ambitious part. And wouldn't that be something? And as I said, it sounds cool on paper. It sounds like, oh yeah, we get all the characters. But when you really apply that, it's like, yeah, that's... I've heard a lot of people say, hey, it'd be fine if you had like a few short segments where, you play as, Leon, or you play as Jill, you play as Chris. But the problem here is I don't want short segments where I play as Chris, Leon, and Jill. If I'm going to play as them, I want them parts to be substantial. I want them to add something. I don't just want a quick, oh, there's a 5-minute section of them beating up everything or shooting everything to death. That's just, it's not going to be very memorable outside of you seeing it for the first time. It's just going to be, whatever. I blinked and it was over. I want it to be substantial as well as conclusion, because that's the big part, a conclusion to their tales and their stories. Not to mention all these characters, Chris, Jill, Leon, Claire, Ada, they all have different things they need to resolve that aren't all conclusively together with each other. It's not like they all have the same story. They're all 5 completely different characters. You could say Jill and Chris are probably, I guess, the closest in terms of, their major goal just because they work together. And I guess you could argue, Leon and Ada because they're always seen in each other's games, but even they have their different modes, working for completely different factions and stuff. But my point is that you have all these characters and you're going to resolve them and all their different plot points all at the same time. It's just going to be a rush job up the ass at that point, and I just do not trust Capcom, of all people, to write that in a convincing way that's satisfying to the point. And what I mean by satisfying to the point of, hey, you know what? This is the end. I accept it. I'm satisfied. I don't have to see these characters in any major role or something like that, or it may possibly ever again in the future. You really expect them to do that in one game? Yeah. Not to mention they've already tried to do that twice, and it didn't really pan out too well for them. Obviously, the first time was Resident Evil 6, and as I said before, it was supposed to be a big moment where Chris and Leon finally meet, but who really remembers that anymore? They just try to forget Resident Evil 6 as much as possible, even though I'm one of the few that did enjoy it for what it's worth. It's not obviously one of my favorites, but most people just try to pretend it doesn't exist at all and thinks it is an absolute disaster on a colossal level. And then you have the recently released Death Island, which just celebrated its 2nd year anniversary. Kind of crazy to believe that thing's 2 years old now. I just remember when it was first revealed, but it was supposed to be this big moment of, hey, you have all the characters, they're going to meet for the first time together on the same screen. And once you get over that notion of them doing it, it's just like, okay, that's really all I really remember it for. It has a few moments, but not enough to make me go, oh my goodness gracious me, they really nailed it. It is what it is. Just a simple, easy watch. But once again, those things are just more examples of, I don't think Capcom is the team that's going to qualify to write a bunch of major, not just a bunch of side characters, but major characters, conclude all their storylines, as well as tell a new storyline for new characters, as well as whoever else is in the game and whatever else is going on there. It's just too much going on. So for me personally, how would I personally want it? I think we're almost at the point where we get down and say Leon is there. Knowing my luck, watch none of the OG characters being there. Wouldn't that be something crazy? That, I'll tell you what, that would be definitely a time there. But more than likely, it looks like Leon is going to be in it. To me, I would say in terms of major OG characters, in terms of doing something substantial, I'd say have at least 2 of the main 5. And in this case, if you got Leon, I guess you got to have Ada there. It just makes the most sense. They have the closest connection with each other, and it wouldn't have 2 random separate things. And my hope is maybe one day in another game, you can maybe be satisfied with the whole Jill squad, and maybe Jill and Chris, obviously they're connected. Claire, I have no idea what they're ever going to do with her, because I don't even think Capcom knows what they want to do with her. But I can also argue that with Jill to a degree as well. But as I said before, I get the notion of seeing all of them together, but when you really think about it and put it together, there's not enough time in a game to do everybody justice and do everyone respect. Because remember, this is also a passing of a torch, so you also got Grace. He's also going to have a major role being the protagonist of the game, so it's just like, I don't want it to be all over the place like that and just keep jumping around, because then the pacing's going to get all messed up if you constantly have, you play a little bit for this character, and then you play a little bit for that character. Now, one thing they could do, and I don't know if people will be up for this, is maybe what they did similar to Resident Evil 7, is where they could have DLC over time where you have main campaigns where maybe you get a few scenes where you see a major OG character, but maybe you don't necessarily play as them, but then later online they'll have DLC, which it'd be cool if it was like Not a Hero where you don't even have to pay for it. But you know, it is what it is. Capcom, they're probably gonna get their money out of it anyway. But where you can at least play as that character for at least a decent amount of time. But some people might not be like, hey, I don't want DLC. I want it in the game already. So I don't know, unfortunately. But my point is that I don't want them to tackle so much because I just don't trust them to do it effectively and satisfying. Because if it's going to be a conclusion, that means that's it. That's the end. We're never seeing them again. I mean, I guess you'll see them, I'll say croak, but like, you'll see them again, but not in a major way. But like, they're basically, their story is done. Not to mention, another thing they're going to also have to have time to explain when they show off any of the OG characters is what they've been up to the last, goodness gracious me, how many years it's been since we last seen them. I'm not talking about years in our time, but years in the game's time. Because if this game takes place 30 years after Raccoon City, and barring the last time we've seen them, some people have not been seen for, well over a decade. So what have they been up to the past decade, and how have they changed? They might be a little bit different than the last time we saw them. So that's going to take a lot of time as well. It's just, you can't, there's just not enough time. The game's not big enough, and it already went over the fact that, it's not an open world or semi-open world game, so that's not part of the ambitious part too. So it's not seemingly big enough to do all this stuff. Hopefully I made my points clear. At the end of the day, I get the notion of seeing everything, but I just think there's just not enough to go around to be fair and respectful to all parties, and it not being a coherent mess where it's just a little bit of everything. When you try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one. But that is my opinion. I want to hear your guys' opinion. How do you feel about this? Do you want to see all the OG characters? Do you want to see a few? Or maybe possibly you don't want to see anyone. You just want to embrace the new era. Let me know in the comment section down below. But thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. And hopefully I can see you guys back in the next one. Thanks, and I'll see you all later. Peace.